It's interesting, and a lot of people don't realize that the United States Mint has struck over 10 trillion coins for circulation in countries outside of our own borders here in the United States. It's a fascinating subset of coin collecting, especially if you like American coins and you want something that's a little bit different. But I've also found it's an interesting way to add silver to a silver stack that sometimes flies under the radar. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to talk about pieces made in the USA but circulated outside of our own borders. If you are new to the channel, my name is Dub C. I want to thank you for being with me here today. Hopefully you'll go ahead and click on that subscription button, become part of this community. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, hold on tight. This is going to be kind of a fun journey, not something that we see very often, but this has got a lot of potential, and I think that this is a really interesting way to add a little bit of spice to an American coin collection and to a precious metal stack. If you're new to the channel, I like to begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. And I like to begin my videos where I can with a definition that we can kind of work back into the subject matter. Not so much a definition, I just wanted to talk about something that's kind of interesting. It's called a registry set, and this is something that PCGS and some of the other third-party graders have kind of created. It's a little bit of a competition. It's a little bit of an online catalog of your own pieces. Essentially what a registry set is that if you are a collector of a series, and the series can be defined pretty much any way that you want to define it. PCGS, for example, has the ability for you to add your coins to an online registry, and they have kind of defined what a registry set should be. So if, for instance, you like Lincoln cents, there's a registry set of Lincoln cents. And the idea is that you have the nicest, highest quality of the coins that you can possibly get in your registry set. And it's a weighted system, so the better the quality of the coin, the more points you get. And it also goes in terms of completion. So if you've got a complete full set of all of the Lincoln cents, and you also have some of the rare varieties, and you've also got some of the very seldom seen types of these pieces, the registry sets can differ in terms of completeness and exactly what it is that you're supposed to add to it. But you can get a super, super complete set, and you can share it with other people. It's a little bit of competition between serious collectors. It's just an interesting way for PCGS and the other third-party graders to sell their services by allowing you to add your pieces to a registry set. And the cool thing is that you often have images of these pieces, so if you're interested in a series, you can flip through it and see what other pieces are like in other collections. It's really kind of a neat idea. There is a registry set for what we're talking about here, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So the idea, the concept that we're talking about here are pieces struck by the United States Mint for other countries. And the way I see that is really kind of two different subsets. The first one is pieces that were struck for territories of the United States, either right before they became territories or right after they became territories. So that's kind of how I see the first part of this subset of American minted coins. And the second one is really those coins that were struck for other countries that have little to do with our own internal politics, except that a lot of them seem to happen around world wars, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. So kind of two sections. We'll talk about the territorial pieces, we'll talk about pieces struck for other countries, and then I'll kind of wrap it up with some of my advice, some suggestions that I have if this is something that you want to pursue. Let's talk a little bit about the whole concept of pieces struck by the United States Mint for other countries, because a lot of people don't even realize this has happened. But again, 10 trillion different coins that were made by the United States for circulation in other countries. In 1874, Congress, the United States Congress, authorized the U.S. Mint to strike coins for other countries as long as they're able to meet the demands of our own domestic needs. And the United States Mint has always been on the cutting edge in terms of technology and its speed with which it can create pieces. So it's not surprising that we had the capacity to work with other countries, right? And I think the reasons why we might have worked with other countries, again, has to do with things like wars. Are we supplying our allies with pieces that they need? Is it kind of a political thing? Were we helping out countries that we kind of needed their help with other projects? I think you'll see some of that start to unfold here. The Mint has struck pieces since 1874 for other countries. The Mint has made pieces for Australia, Costa Rica, Curacao, the Dominican Republic, Fiji, France, Liberia, the Netherlands, Syria, and the list goes on and on. It's really pretty amazing. They started with circulation strikes in 1876 for Venezuela and finished in 1983 for Panama. That's in terms of circulation strikes. Some people say that they're continuing to make coins for other countries now. I suppose it's possible. Maybe they just don't talk about it quite as much. But interestingly, in the year 2000, the United States Mint struck a commemorative set, kind of in cooperation with Iceland. And it was the Leif Erikson set. So you're looking at an image of one of these here. The dollar is on the left side. I think it's a really cool design. These are silver pieces. The dollar's on the left side, and then there's the Icelandic 1,000 kroner on the right side. So you can see these are companion pieces. Both of these struck by the United States Mint, one of them denominated in US dollars, the other one denominated in the Icelandic kroner. And you can find these sets. They're really not that expensive, somewhere a little bit south of $100 a set right now. Both of these pieces struck at the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia. So you can see we've got a long, rich history of having done this. And as recently as 2000, but maybe a little bit more recently than that too, we have continued to struck pieces for kind of special occasions. Lots of wartime pieces. Some of these pieces kind of struck in kind of secret, and we'll talk about one of those too. The registry set is called World Coins Manufactured by Mints of the United States. And this registry set, if you want it to be complete, and again, you kind of get points based on completeness for these registry sets. 1,090 coins required to complete this set. And I understand the most complete set that was ever assembled was a little bit less than 1,000 pieces, I believe. And they've since kind of broken up the set to focus on another area. So this is wide open. I think the current leader on this set is only about half of the coins included. So this is really an interesting subset with a lot of potential. If this is something you want to pursue, this can be pretty exciting. And again, I see them as two series, kind of territorial pieces and then foreign pieces. Let's jump into the territorial pieces. You can find these in the Red Book, and that's one of the neat things. You know, when a coin makes it to the Red Book, and you're looking at towards the end of the Red Book, this green bar, Hawaiian and Puerto Rican issues. We'll talk about 3 different countries here. When it makes it into the Red Book, it's kind of seen as authentic, genuine, and part of the American coin culture. So the fact that these pieces, the territorial pieces, are included in the Red Book is a lot of cachet. That really means that these are taken very seriously by collectors of American coins. Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and also the Philippines. Those are the ones that are currently included in the Red Book. And I think the Red Book kind of puts things in occasionally and takes them out again. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. Hawaiian coinage is one of the most interesting ones, I think. These were made in 1883. There was a cent that is often included that was actually issued a little bit earlier. You're looking at a set of these 1883 pieces. The first thing you notice about the Hawaiian pieces is that they all pretty much share the same image. Does that remind you of a coin series from the United States where they all, the half dollar, the quarter, the dime, all have the same image on it? Yeah, I'm talking about Barber coinage, and there's a reason for that. The Hawaiian pieces actually designed by Charles Barber. So it's not, surprising that pieces that were struck by the United States Mint for circulation in other countries might have been designed by our own designers. Sure enough, the Hawaiian pieces that I think of when I think of the Hawaiian pieces, all struck or all designed by Charles Barber. They were struck at the San Francisco Mint. The dollar, the half, the quarter, the dime. I mentioned there's also a cent that is often collected alongside them. There's also a 12.5-cent pattern piece that was never really struck. The examples of these patterns are quite rare. Some of these coins are very, very expensive. But you can find average circulated examples of these pieces, and they won't break the bank. I think that's one of the fun things about them. We'll talk about Charles Barber again in a second. He had his fingers in a lot of pies when it came to these kind of late 19th century, early 20th century foreign pieces. If you are interested in pursuing the Hawaiian coins, and I used to have a fantastic example of the Hawaiian dollar. It's one of those things that I cycled out of many, many years ago, and now I always kind of regret it. You're looking at a picture of it here. Be careful with these pieces. Almost all of these pieces were melted. The Hawaiian pieces struck by the U.S. Mint. Almost all of them were melted. The ones that weren't melted were largely cleaned. These were just kind of an early tourist piece, right? 1883. So around the turn of the century, when things were starting to normalize with the United States, we were taking over kind of. These were kind of seen as a charming throwback, and people pocket pieced them. They mounted them in jewelry. This was a really common thing to have had done back then. Now we kind of, cringe a little bit when we see that. But in my experience, so many of these Hawaiian pieces have been cleaned, and there are tons of counterfeits out there too. This is a heavily counterfeited set, and I think part of the reason for that is because these were kind of unusual. People weren't that familiar with them, so I think counterfeiters jumped on that. Be careful if these are pieces you want to pursue. I think they're super cool. Get them certified. These are not the kind of things that you want to purchase raw. What's up next? We've got I talked about a little bit about the Puerto Rican. This was a smaller series. We didn't really see that much in terms of the Puerto Rican coins. You're looking at a very short series from Puerto Rico, but the Philippine pieces, and I can flip the page over, and we've got pages and pages of the Philippine stuff. The Philippine Mint and the pieces that we made for the Philippines, really interesting. Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States after the Spanish-American War in 1898. So many of these early Philippine pieces, and you're looking at some Philippine pesos here, were struck by San Francisco and Philadelphia from 1903 to about 1919. Manila started striking them soon after that. Who was the designer for these? Well, it was Charles Barber. At least he had something to do with it, right? He didn't make the full design, but he tweaked it quite a bit. It's easy to understand how these pieces would be collected alongside American pieces, because when you flip them over, look at that, United States of America on them. And this one you can actually see, it's got a mint mark down there. That's an S next to the 1909, really tiny. And we'll talk about the mint marks. So you often see American mint marks on foreign coins. It's kind of cool. So this is a 1909 S struck at San Francisco. These pieces also counterfeited. There was a ton of these that were dumped in Manila Bay, I think. So you've got some of these that have saltwater damage to them. They also circulated heavily. They also were cleaned quite a bit. Really nice mint state examples of these pieces are hard to find. So if you're looking for these, get them slabbed if at all possible. Really sharpen those grading skills. I've had the opportunity to submit a few of them to NGC over the years, and worked really hard to find nice examples raw, and was rewarded with pretty high grade examples that sold for a pretty good price. These are a tricky series. The funny thing about these, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, is that you can often find these circulated examples for about melt. That's how common they are. But those really nice examples, those are tricky. Philippine pieces, kind of fun, right? And the fact that they say United States of America on the back with a shield and an eagle is just really cool. The silver content of these, not quite as pure as American coins. They're also a little bit smaller. I would see them kind of as an equivalent of a $50 rather than a full crown or a silver dollar. But they're still really interesting pieces. So that's really kind of the territorial pieces, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and also the pieces from the Philippines. Interesting pieces. Let's shift gears a little bit. And we'll talk about pieces that were struck by the United States Mint for foreign countries. And the one that comes to mind immediately to me is the Saudi Arabian gold 4 pounds. Pound is the unit of currency, not the weight. And I've talked about this one pretty extensively. I actually did an entire video about this called The Top Secret Gold of World War II, Black Gold for Yellow Gold. I'll put a link down below. 1945 Saudi Arabian 4 pounds. What's interesting about this one? This one is the weight equivalent of a $20 gold piece, and it's off by about a gram, but it's also slightly more pure than American coins. This one is 22 karat gold, 91.67% pure, as opposed to the $20 gold piece that was struck in 90% gold. You're looking at the front of this piece. Does it say Saudi Arabia? Does it say the date? Does it say the denomination on it? The answer to those questions is no. What this says is United States Mint at Philadelphia, USA. When a coin says nothing but that, and the reverse actually says the purity, the weight of it, no mention of where it's from, where it's made, what it's for, its denomination. This, to me, is an American bullion piece, but it was struck for Saudi Arabia, and it's controversial because when it was struck in 1945, 1946, the United States of America was under Executive Order 6102, right? That was the presidential order that said that Americans could no longer own gold certificates, and we were severely limited to the amount of gold that we could have in the form that it took. So the fact that the United States of America was producing gold coins for another country, that rubbed a lot of people raw. And the thing is that the United States government knew that that was going to happen, so these were kept under wraps. Not very many people knew this was happening when it happened. There is also kind of an ongoing myth about these pieces, and I talked about that in the video, and really briefly, the idea is that a lot of people think that these were made to pay for oil rights. We had a corporation called Aramco that was a conglomerate of American oil companies that was searching for oil in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. And over time, Saudi Arabia has essentially purchased out this company, so it's really a Saudi Arabian company now. But the myth, the continuing myth about these is that these were made to pay for those oil rights, right? This was the royalties that American companies were paying to Saudi Arabia for the right to get the oil out of the ground. And it's splitting hairs to an extent, but it's also a really important differentiation to make here. Really briefly, corporations could also not own gold while 6102 was enforced from 1933 to about 1970. So there is really no way that corporations could have paid Saudi Arabia gold, which is what Saudi Arabia wanted in exchange for their oil. So what happened, or what almost certainly happened, and I know it's a fine distinction, is that the United States companies were paying Saudi Arabia in dollars. And then Saudi Arabia was going to the gold window at the Treasury. That's the gold department where foreign countries could buy gold from the United States. They were taking those royalties paid in US dollars, and they were buying gold. And foreign countries could buy gold from the United States during this period of time. So it's a distinction. It's a very slight distinction, but I think it's a really important distinction. Saudi was taking dollars and buying gold, and they said, oh, by the way, can you go ahead and mint these into coin-sized bullion pieces? And Saudi Arabia did the smart thing, which was to immediately ship these to China and sell them for their melt value, which was considerably more than the amount that they had just paid the United States government for the gold content. So Saudi Arabia was kind of getting it coming and going. They were on top of things, and they were making money left and right off of this. These are quite rare. The mintage of these was somewhere around 90,000, 91,000 for the larger size. That's the 4-pound. They also made a single-pound version that looks a lot like it, except it doesn't have this wide border around the outside. These are commonly counterfeited, and we've talked before about the replica gold pieces that were made in the Middle East in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. So it's not surprising that when you have skilled goldsmiths that had plenty of gold on hand, they could pretty easily duplicate this device. It's not a particularly intense or design-intensive coin for them to have made. So these pieces replicated in gold quite often. If you're gonna pursue these pieces, or the 1-pound version of it, the smaller version, definitely get these pieces slabbed by a reputable third-party grader. Avoid those counterfeits. There's no reason to have one. Even if it's nice gold, you want the real thing. So one of the most interesting pieces made by the United States Mint for foreign countries, because of all of the intrigue and the stuff that's associated with it, I think it's really fascinating. Shifting gears quite a bit now, we'll go on to one of the smallest coins the United States has ever made, and I'm talking about the Panama Pill. This is the 2.5 centésimos. Let's see if we can get it to focus. Look how tiny that thing is compared to my fingernail. You can see just how tiny this thing is. It's really small. The 2.5 centésimos from Panama from 1904 probably really struck in 1905. We made about 400,000 of these. Let's see if we can get that to focus. There we go. It's a really cute little coin, and it's really thick. It's a chunky little beast. The reason that this is interesting, it is the smallest diameter coin ever struck by the United States Mint. The 3-cent silver piece that we made in the 1800s, slightly larger diameter, but considerably thinner. So arguably this is the smallest, but it's also not the lightest. It's a little bit of a strange distinction to even talk about the Panama pill, called the pill, obviously because it's so small. 1904 dated, smallest diameter coin ever struck by the United States Mint. It used to create kind of a transition when Panama, which was following American traditions at this point, obviously with the Panama Canal and the economic development going on at the early part of the 1900s, they were trying to kind of slough off the 8 reale, the base 8 system that Spanish colonial rule had instilled, and instead go for the decimal system that Americans had been using for a while, and we copied that from the French. But the point is that if you had a 10 centésimos and a 20 or 25 centésimos and a 50 centésimos, you can see that these are kind of traditional Americanized versions of these coins. But if you're still trying to transition from that base 8 system to the base 10 system, you needed something that you could add to the 10 piece to make it 12 and a half piece, right? This is the 2.5 centésimo. So if you combine that with a 10 centésimo, you had your traditional 1/8 again. So really kind of a 1-year transitional piece. It's so interesting because they're so tiny. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to add a couple of these to my stack over time. Really interesting thing about these pieces is that they tone beautifully. I've seen some amazing rainbow tone version of these, but they're so small. Does it even matter? You need a magnifying glass or a nice loupe to be able to see them. You saw how much my camera was struggling to show it. Really cool colors on these sometimes. I've never seen counterfeits of these. It wouldn't surprise me that there are counterfeits. Be careful if you're pursuing these, but these are just cool. There's something really fun about this. The fact that the United States made such a tiny little coin with a 400,000 mintage, who knows how many of these pieces were lost, right? I wouldn't be surprised if well over half of these are gone, never to return. So keep your eyes out for the Panama pill. That's a fun piece. And then we're going to shift over to some larger pieces from Panama. I like these. These are the Panama Balboa. They are KM number 13. Earlier type, 1931 and 1934, are beautiful pieces. So we'll take a look at this, and you can see the obverse of this, kind of a non-traditional coin, but that is a really pretty device, right? That's Balboa with his beautiful Spanish kind of helmet on and his collars and his armor. But when you flip it over, this is considered one of the most beautiful versions of a standing liberty ever made on a coin. And the luster on these pieces is fantastic. You're looking at a 1947 example right here. Just a beautiful design. And obviously one of the things that I am drawn to about these pieces is, like a lot of Central and South American coins of this period of time, it actually shows the 900 weight and the weight in grams, the 900 purity and the weight in grams, 26.73. If that sounds familiar, 26.73, check out one of these compared to a United States silver dollar. They are identical, right? Same shape, same form, same purity, same weight. Everything about these is exactly identical. And that's one of the neat things about these. The United States stopped making silver dollars in 1935. So if you want kind of a silver dollar size piece that has ties to the United States, both in terms of where it was minted and what it was made of, the Balboa really scratches that itch. It's a really cool thing. Struck in Philadelphia and San Francisco, the 1931-1947, I believe, were struck in Philadelphia. The 1934 struck in San Francisco. Same dimensions as the US dollar, 26.73 grams of 900 fine, 38.1. We saw the comparison between the two. Surprisingly small mintages on these pieces. Some were between about 200,000 and 500,000. If you looked at an American silver dollar with a mintage of 200,000, that would be a key date. That would be the kind of thing that people clamor for. A lot of folks don't realize these were made by the United States Mint. 1931, we were still making silver dollars. So this is really on par with a silver dollar in a way that almost no other coin really is. And I think that makes them pretty exciting. And the really cool thing about these is that these two fly under the radar. Unless your dealer, your local coin shop, has a lot of people beating down the door to buy Panamanian coins, they're going to chuck these in the melt bin, right? They're going to see these as just a typical 20th century silver crown. I think they have a lot of interesting potential to them, and they still seem to sell at a pretty low discount. So look for these pieces, try to get them as uncirculated as you possibly can. I think these two examples here probably in the low 60s, MS62, MS63. And I didn't pay more than $1 or $2 over melt for these. And I do keep my eyes out for them, and I will seriously pick them up if I find any other examples, as long as they meet that criteria. I want them to be as beautiful, high-end as they possibly can be, with brilliant mint luster, not clean, not overly worn. But I think they're one of the best series ever produced by the United States Mint. Everybody should have a Balboa, and everybody should have a Panama Pill, especially if you're interested in this kind of pieces struck by the U.S. Mint for other countries. The next one is even more intriguing. And I did a video series about these too. This is the 1934 Chinese junk silver dollar. Now it's called the junk silver dollar because it's got a junk boat on the back. That's what that boat is called, traditional Chinese sailing vessel called a junk. These pieces, really intriguing. So this one I actually bought raw and I submitted it to NGC. I'll put the series down below. I did a kind of an unboxing of these. This was struck in 1934, at least it's supposed to have been. Now, the interesting thing about these pieces is that these dies were actually created in Philadelphia, struck in Philadelphia, and I think also in Denver, San Francisco and Denver, but also in Shanghai, China. So this is really interesting. What was going on this period of time? China was fighting a civil war. This was Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese nationalists fighting against Mao Zedong and the communists. And in order to prop up the nationalists, the United States government started producing these pieces in mass. We struck something like 30 million of these pieces to try to help prop up the Chinese government. And even though they are dated 1934, we struck them in 1949, and some sources even say 1950. So these pieces were backdated. Why would they have done that? I think there's a couple different reasons for it. The reason that most people talk about is the fact that the Chinese merchants who were supplying the government at the time and the soldiers who were fighting for the nationalists wanted to be paid in silver, and China wanted them to trust the purity, the quality of the silver for these pieces. So they were afraid that if they issued something with the 1949 date on it, it might be seen as less than the earlier pieces, so they simply backdated them. But what's really interesting about these pieces is that I think a lot of it had to do with the United States propping up the government in the way that we wanted them to be seen as having more resources than maybe they actually did. If the bad guys, in this case that would have been the communists, if they knew that China had millions and millions and millions of silver dollars dated all the way back to 1934, then they weren't spending crazy to try to win this war. They had lots of reserves. And I think that psychology of these pieces is sometimes incredibly important. So I think that had something to do with it also. I think we wanted China to be seen as having tons of resources, like this was no big deal. But I think that this probably was a big deal, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. So the next one we talk about, this one is a little bit tricky to determine whether or not it was an American-made piece or a Shanghai piece. There are tells, you can tell in certain different aspects of these pieces, and that's one of the interesting things about a lot of these coins, especially the restrikes that were made. Often the government included a little bit of a hint, a little Easter egg almost, on some of these pieces, so you could tell the difference between the original piece and the modern restrike. You could tell a little bit of a difference from when it was made in the US or some other country and when it was made in the foreign country itself. So the next example is a great example of this. This is the 1898 1 peso, and you can see down at the bottom it actually says un peso right here. This is that traditional Phrygian cap design that we saw on the 8 reales going all the way back to the 1820s in Mexico. This one struck in 1898. At least that's what the date says, and struck at Mexico City. At least that's what the mint mark says. But the reason I'm hedging that is because even though this is an 1898 dated 1 peso, this piece was also struck way after. In fact, this piece was struck in 1949. Who was it struck for? China. right? This is another example of China needing silver desperately and wanting to have a silver vehicle that would be seen as a high quality piece. These older pieces that had been circulated in China for 100 years, and we've seen examples with all sorts of chop marks on them, this was seen as something that would be really easily accepted by the merchants and the soldiers in China. So China asked the United States to help them. The United States put a little bit of pressure on Mexico and reissued the 1898 peso in 1949. But what's even more interesting about that is that Mexico ran into a jam when it was trying to produce these pieces. So San Francisco had to jump in. The United States Mint at San Francisco started making 1 peso Mexican coins backdated 50 years before they were released, not for circulation in Mexico, but rather for circulation in China. How strange is that? The United States Mint wound up making at least 2 million of these pieces. But unfortunately, the records indicate that China fell kind of to the communists. They were never able to take the shipments of these pieces. And because of that, the United States Mint supposedly melted all 2 million examples of the 1898 Mexican piece struck by San Francisco for use in China. There are rumors that persist that these pieces did kind of squeak out. I think it would be really hard to tell whether a piece was a Mexican piece or an American-made piece at this time, but we do know that this is a restrike because of the orientation of the O in the Mexico City Mint mark. It's not level with the top of the M. That's what the original pieces look like. So we know that this is a restrike. We are almost certain that this was actually a restrike that was struck in Mexico, but because the United States Mint made 2 million of them also, I thought that this would be an interesting piece to kind of throw into the mix, and who knows, maybe this is one of those really scarce pieces that made it out without being melted. What do you think? I've got some examples of some of the pieces that you are more likely to find in those junk bins at your local dealers, the 5 for $1 or the 1 for 25 cent type coins. Keep your eyes out for these because these are really interesting pieces also, and these ones definitely fly under the radar. These are the kinds of pieces you find all the time. You're looking at a couple of pieces from Cuba. So we've got an example of a 1915 10 centésimos or 10 cents, 10 centavos. And then we also have a 1948 20 centavo. Who designed these? Charles Barber. how funny is that? These pieces made all the way up into the 1950s. And they're beautiful coins in their own right. There's something that's really kind of pretty about the simplicity of these Cuban pieces. And you can find full pesos or the larger size crowns that have these devices on them too. The 1915 10 centavo, 1948 20 centavo, both struck at Philadelphia, both designed by Charles Barber. They are 900 fine silver, so these are really nice little silver coins, a great way to add some interest to your stack. You can see it says 10 centavo and 20 centavo also. Beautiful pieces, fun to collect. You find these all the time in those bins. Definitely keep your eyes open for them. 900 silver is kind of fun, right? Struck in Philadelphia, but a lot of folks don't know, even if you know about these pieces, that the United States continued to strike pieces for Cuba well into the 1950s. We're talking Cuban Missile Crisis era, Bay of Pigs type thing. So right up until that point, the United States was continuing to prop up the Cuban government by making silver coins for them too. You're looking at a 1952 Cuban 10 centavo and the 1953 25 centavo. 900 fine silver, 10 million made and 19 million made, I think, respectively, on those pieces. Maybe I've got that reversed. Struck in Philadelphia. No, these weren't designed by Charles Barber, but they are kind of interesting pieces, and they are also struck of 900 fine silver. So these pieces, to me, don't really scream silver. There's something about, kind of a copper nickel look to these pieces. So these pieces definitely fly under the radar. If you're interested in pursuing these types of coins, keep your eyes out for these later Cuban pieces. I've got some hints about that a little bit later too. I mentioned before in the video that we often see these pieces made during war times, and I think part of that is because industrial capacity was being used to make munitions, but also I think there were some times where people were afraid that their territories would fall to the bad guys, or sometimes they just needed a helping hand. So we've got some interesting pieces from Australia here. These are 1942, 1943, and 1944 Australian 3 pence pieces. So tiny I couldn't even pick them all up. Cute little coins. These are really fun. And I remember when these were just everywhere in those dealer bins. You could find these without even thinking about it. But interestingly, these are made of 92.5% sterling silver, right? This is kind of the British standard for Australia back in the 1940s. We made 80 million of these tiny little coins. And they were actually found, and I think maybe we can see examples of it here. Sometimes these are found with the American mint marks on them. There's an example, I think, right there. The D and the S mint mark. Let's see if I can bring it in. You've got that right there. So it's interesting to see these foreign pieces with American mint marks on them. As I am filming right now, even though these are tiny little pieces, they are about 1.5 grams, 1.41 grams, which means that their silver content about $1.36. So these are the kinds of things that are fun to look for. You're not going to get rich off of them, right? There were so many of them made, but if you can buy these for $0.25 and they have $1.30's worth of silver in them, not many opportunities in life to make a 500 or 600% profit from the second that you buy something like this. I do keep my eyes open for these. You can see I've got a nice little stack of these going. They're just a fun thing to have. They're so small, but they're sterling silver and they're made by the United States Mint. And now we're approaching 100 years with these pieces, right? In the next decade or so, that's where we're going to hit. While we're talking about these, there's another series that I think is kind of hand in hand with these. The 1942 Netherlands, the original one of this, is the 1/10 of the, let's see if I can pick it out here. There we go. The 1/10 kroner, I believe. So you've got the 1/10 symbol there. And then 1942, what is that next to it? That's the S of San Francisco. These were made for the government of the Netherlands, 1942. And right after that, we started making 10-cent pieces that were made for the Netherlands East Indies. And you're seeing examples of those here too. These are really neat little coins, especially the 42. Just a beautiful design, right? These are considerably smaller. We made about 300 million of these pieces, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, 1.4 grams a piece, but they are only 64% fine. So this is a really low silver content. Why did they do that? I think it might have had something to do with the traditional from the Netherlands, but also maybe there was an element of not wanting to get the enemy's hands these into the enemy hands if they were solid silver. Maybe there was something about that. An individual piece, no big deal, but when you're talking about 300 million of them, almost 1/3 of a billion, we probably wanted to reserve that silver as much as we could. And we have other examples of wartime efforts where we removed silver content from some of the coins. We've got the steel cents, we've got the war nickels where we needed those materials for munitions. So maybe there was something going on with that too. These ones not quite as valuable. 64% silver, at least on the later ones. You're talking about 94 cents a piece. But again, at 25 cents a piece, that's still pretty inexpensive if you can find them. I wouldn't pay a premium for any of these. Maybe the early Cuban pieces if they are exceptionally nice condition. But these are the kinds of things that your kids can look for if you take them with you to the local coin shops. If you happen to come across them at a garage sale, you know that these at least have some silver content. I'll talk about that here in a second too. Interesting, right? A whole collection of pieces either made for United States territories or made to circulate outside of the United States borders for foreign countries. A rich history and so many different interesting things to collect if you like this type of series. And a fun way to stack also. I mentioned I'd give you some tips on them too. I didn't even begin to scratch the surface on these pieces. Obviously, there's at least 1,090 examples that you could draw from. You could stay busy for the rest of your days just trying to assemble a set like this. So keep that in mind. Not every piece that was struck by the United States Mint was struck specifically by the United States Mint. In other words, if there was a series made for a foreign country in the 1940s and the United States Mint struck some of them, be aware that other mints around the world might also have jumped in and produced some of these pieces also. So if you're going to pursue these pieces and you really want the pieces struck by the United States Mint, be careful. Do a little bit of research. NGC is really helpful with this. I like the idea of looking at that registry set from PCGS, and again, I'll put a link to that down below. But I find that the website Numista is really good about this. They always show which mint made these pieces, and it's so interesting to see these pieces from a foreign country, and you scroll down and you see Philadelphia or Denver. So use a little bit of research before you go looking for these pieces, and don't just assume because you know that one of these coins was made by the United States that all of them are going to be made by the United States. They still have the attributes that might make them interesting, but for me, I like the concept of them being made by the United States Mint. That's one of the things that I'm looking for. So do a little bit of research first. Focus on the issues that have the greatest appeal to you. For me, as a stacker, somebody who's constantly crossing that bridge between collecting and stacking, it's the silver of these that I like. Obviously, everybody wants the gold too, but you're not going to come across very many of those. The fact that so many of these interesting silver pieces fly under the radar, especially with things like the Balboa, I think that makes these really interesting, a really fun way to stack a little bit of silver on the side and to get it at a huge discount. And that's the next tip. Don't pay a premium for these. Really go after these pieces that are inexpensive. Search for them. You will find them. They are out there, I guarantee you. Numesta is the best resource, I think. NGC and PCGS both help for these, but really know what you're looking for when you go out, unless you can buy them cheap at the get-go and you don't mind taking them home and doing a little bit of research later. Spending a few bucks that way is no big deal. The cost of tuition is always going to be worth it when you can examine coins and really think about that from the other perspective. Coins struck by the United States Mint for circulation either in our territories or countries outside of our borders. What do you think about that? Are you already stacking these? Did you even realize that some of the pieces that are in your stack were actually made by the United States, even though they don't say United States of America on them? I think it's a really cool thing, and one that we don't talk about very often. Now that you know about these, are you going to pursue them any further? Is this something you're going to keep your eyes open for in the future? Is this something that you just have no interest in? I totally get that too, but wow, so many different fun options, and I think so many people aren't aware that this is a possibility. I think it's really kind of cool. If you've got questions about any of the pieces that we talked about here today, or if you've got other examples that you might have some questions about, definitely leave that down below. As I'm fond of saying, if you've got a question, there's a good chance somebody else has that question. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. And I also have a new series of videos called the Subscriber Question and Answer video series. So if you've ask a question that I can't easily answer with a couple of sentences, sometimes if I've got the ability, the knowledge, the examples, I might make an entire video specifically about your question. That's a great way to have a video made for you, especially specifically for you, and up on the internet for everybody to see. Plus, it's usually kind of an interesting video, if I do say so myself. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, definitely go ahead and click on the subscription button. Most of my videos premiere on Friday evenings, and I'm there during the premiere of these videos for the first time that they play, to watch the video along with you, to answer questions, to have a little bit of an interesting discussion while we're watching the video play. And I often go live with a live stream immediately after the premiere, so we can take a deeper dive. You can ask more questions. You can have conversations with other people in the community who just got done watching the video. It's usually a bit of an open floor, so it doesn't necessarily have to be about the topic that we just watched. But if it's coin related or precious metals related, I love these live streams. They're usually high energy. It's a fun way to start the weekend, and I really look forward to them. It makes my week zip by getting ready for these live streams following the premiere. So if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and click on the subscription button, hit the notification button also, and that way you'll know about it. Hopefully you're watching this video with me on a Friday evening. Always be learning. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.